Okay, today's lesson is about after World War I, some of the conflicts. If you didn't finish your e-learning day assignments, you had to do 2. So I'm grading them as they come in. You get the choice of which out of the 6, which do you want to do. And today we're going to do notes on your chart instead of normal notes in your notebook. And as I go through, I will tell you which ones you're going to pick. So there are 2 columns. One is fears, one is wants, and we're going to go through the 4 countries that kind of won World War I, and what they wanted and what they feared would happen. And I'll stop and make sure you got what you need. So after World War I, the U.S. had some fear. Chromebook down. The U.S. did not have as much of a hit on World War I as some of the other countries. We didn't lose as many people, and we didn't have a lot of destruction on our land because the fighting wasn't here. But we were very afraid of immigrants. So put that down on fears.
Still are.
We still are. On the U.S. column, under fears, put immigrants. But we weren't against the immigrants we are now. We were against some of the immigrants from Europe that we didn't think were worthy to be here. Specifically Irish. So we were also afraid of communism. So put that down. We were afraid of the Russians because they were communists. And you have to say this word carefully, but Bolshevik is the group in Russia that was responsible for the communist revolution, who drug out the king, the queen, the 5 kids in maids and shot them all point blank and dumped their bodies. So we are afraid of that group coming to the U.S. and trying to change our government.
What are we supposed to have in the U.S. called?
The fear is communism, Russia, and immigrants.
I'm terrified.
We had signs that when you were... Wake her up.
Wake
Wake up.
I'm
When we had...
sleeping.
Shut up.
When we had signs for jobs, we didn't have Indeed or Monster or ZipRecruiter or whatever. You had to hang a sign, and we had no Irish need apply. We didn't want Irish. We didn't want the Catholics. They were considered a drunken, unruly group.
I think that's
Carson, sit down.
I'm getting it.
Sit. You don't need to be running around.
I'm not even running
Sit.
around.
Stay in your seat.
I can't get answers.
No, because I'm giving you answers.
You talk too fast.
Sit and listen.
I got all the answers.
We also had advertisements about this is not a dumping ground. We did not want the refugees from Europe who had lost their jobs, lost their family, lost their homes, lost transportation to come here. We didn't want to be the dumping ground of people who were struggling. We wanted to go back to normal, but we wanted a white, specifically Protestant group of people coming in. We also had made rules about how many people we would let in. We were already limiting Europeans, specifically Irish, but we also didn't want Chinese coming over here. We didn't want Japanese coming over here. But there was already a large group because that was who was building the railroads. We were paying them very low wages. It was hard work to lay a railroad across the entire country, but we didn't want any more coming over here because China was becoming communist and Japanese were becoming very
Sorry,
aggressive. Now, before I show this video, we had groups who were very powerful about keeping a social structure that they wanted. The KKK. That was well, it still is, a white group of Christians who want supremacy over all the other groups. But Indiana was one of the leading states of this group, and we had the leader actually live in Swarthmore County about 20, 30 years ago. It is not that far removed. In fact, I have had at least one student who told me when he graduated he wanted to join the KKK. It's still here.
That's cute.
Ready to take it too?
But the KKK had dominance over everything in Indiana because the leader was this charismatic guy who had control of everything, but he'd make some mistake and he'd rape somebody brutally. He gives her drugs to kill herself, but before she actually dies, she gets her story out about what he did to her, and he's convicted of rape and abuse. And it was so horrible what he did to her that everybody turned on him, and it kind of weakened the KKK in Indiana.
Yeah, that's Santa.
I remember one time, I went to Matt Davis's house because he used to be my neighbor,
What?
and he walked up to me with
No.
this sign, and it was asking them if she wanted to join the KKK. And the
Apparently, Miss Meyerhoff's daughter was bullied by one of the KKK leader's son. Yeah, she told us this one story one time. Like, her daughter was bullied and tried to kill herself because some boy was bullying her, and the boy was the son of the like leader of the
She's
KKK.
mixed.
What?
Her daughter is half black.
Yeah, I know, but like, just a coincidence that it was like the son of the leader or
Is that
whatever.
a bad team?
They kill people.
There's no sound.
Oh, that's gonna be an issue. It's less than 60 minutes.
Bro, my dad's Irish.
Weston, are we gonna be crippled cornhole buddies in PE?
You're playing losing.
Try.
Look, I know I'm wearing white right now, but it's not what it looks like.
Oh.
I mean, like, yeah, KKK is bad and all. You ever heard of slavery?
Will somebody put my name up there?
What?
Sure.
My name.
Oh, which one? That one?
Yeah.
I don't see Bauer up there. Who scored?
Dude, your hair.
Dude.
You need help.
Why do I need
Because you're mental.
But what happened in 7th grade?
You have a lot.
Conservative
okay.
groups
If
have
people
come out
said
in
the group
droves
was all
to
on
oppose
Kanye.
immigration reform. They may be vocal, but these groups still represent a minority of the population. But what if I told you, less than 100 years ago, a conservative hate group's stance on immigration embodied the opinions of most Americans? In the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan emerged as a powerful political and cultural force. In Indiana, the group's anti-immigrant rhetoric was extremely popular, thanks in large part to its charismatic leader and his ability to suppress negative press. And perhaps it could have remained influential if that same leader had not been charged with second-degree murder and rape. More on the trial later, but first, it is important to understand why and how the KKK used traditionalism as a way to fight off encroaching modernity. Based on my research, Americans have been shocked by the impressive damages and horrors that modern technology had caused during World War I. At the same time, thanks to the successes of the Industrial Revolution, urban areas sprung up across the countryside.
It used to be really
Because of the new low-skilled jobs that came with it, immigrants from across Europe moved into previously white Anglo-Saxon communities. Rural Americans feared the impact that urbanization and industrialization would have on their lives. The country was on the verge of a culture war. For small-town Americans, the Klan represented traditionalism. My research shows that the Klan of the 1920s was a predominantly rural group who saw their livelihoods being taken away from them by immigrants. Clearly, the KKK wanted to fight modernity by protecting traditionalism. But what's shocking is how successful they became. Not only did the group grow to its largest size in the 1920s,
How do you have
but their
virgin
ideas
birth?
on immigration actually
Oh, you
influenced
know,
national legislation.
married.
From 1921 until 1924, Congress passed a series of anti-immigration legislation, culminating with the Johnson-Reed Act. Klan historian David Chalmers asserts that no one represented the dominant American attitudes on immigration more than the Klan. Research shows that the KKK was an influential and national organization, but what surprised me was the fact that it was not strongest in the South, but rather in Indiana. Why would a northern state gravitate towards a hate group? One of the major reasons for the Klan's growth in Indiana was the Klan's larger-than-life leader there, D.C. Stevenson. Stevenson was an excellent speaker, a likable figure, and most importantly, he was able to mobilize his rural supporters across the state. According to historian Bradford Charlotte, Stevenson successfully turned the Indiana Klan into a political machine with which he could wield monolithic clan vote. He was able to use his power and influence to insert politicians loyal to the KKK at the state, local, and national level. Stevenson also benefited from virtually no criticism in the press. As I looked at newspaper articles from the early 1920s, I saw that Klan activities were often given the benefit of the doubt. Many articles and editorials portrayed the group as protectors of white society, as well as law and order. More importantly, papers used KKK members as their source, which usually exaggerated and distorted reality and reported them as fact. This was due to the fact that publishers were threatened with boycotts and Klan violence if they published negative stories. For most publishers, it was easier to accept the bribes and leave the Klan alone. However, this all changed after their charismatic leaders fall from grace. In the spring of 1925, D.C. Stevenson was charged with the murder of not an African American, a Jew, or a Catholic, or even an immigrant, but a white Protestant woman named Madge Oberholzer. While working for the state, she was kidnapped on a train and raped by Stevenson. Before she succumbed to a mixture of a staph infection, which she got from a bite from Stevenson, and mercury chloride that Stevenson had given her to commit suicide, Oberholzer was able to testify to the police against the leader of the KKK. Stevenson was eventually convicted, and the papers across Indiana and nationally turned on the Klan. Furthermore, Stevenson himself gave the press names of politicians who had accepted the KKK's bribes, which only hurt their image more. Just as quickly as they had arrived on the political scene and captured the national sentiment on immigration, the Klan had disappeared back into the fringe of politics. D.C. Stevenson's organization claimed to have high moral standards, but his own actions contradicted the group's ideals. In the end, the 1920s Klan had popular ideas, but fell out of favor because of scandal and corruption.
That's kind of broken.
So since the Klan leader had brutally raped and beaten a Protestant white woman, and he got convicted for it, the support wasn't there for him anymore because he didn't get an opponent, he got one of their own, quote unquote. And so the KKK kind of falls from power after that.
Today,
So one of the things that happened afterward is you have everybody who's just sort of struggling in Europe. You have this lost generation. You have a group of people who've seen everything that they've worked for in their lives be obliterated by war. And nobody came out really on a winning side. Even though there were winners of the war, we didn't win much because there was a cost for that. You had buildings gone, jobs gone, families gone. You had disease and you had destruction, and so people didn't know how to mentally come back from that.
Did the buildings get like blowed up or something?
Yes.
Did it?
And some people were killed in those explosions because Germany had been bombing places. You have the winners of the war, U.S., Britain, and France, who decide what's going to happen to Germany and the other people who were on the wrong side. And they seem really powerful, which makes other people nervous about how powerful they're going to be. But you had to take care of all these buildings and infrastructure and water and sewer systems. You needed to repair the telephone lines. You needed railroads. You have all these veterans who are literally disfigured and missing limbs and things like that have PTSD. How do they come back and go into a normal life that isn't normal now because everybody else is sort of suffering? And what the U.S. was fearing was people with these radical ideas that we didn't agree with, like communism and socialism, and that's what scared us the most. Russia had to drop out of the war because they had a communist revolution and they shot and killed their entire royal family. That's how far it was taken for them. So the U.S. was fearful of that. Plus, you have this huge group of people taken out of society because they were killed in the war. You lost a lot of men. How do you breed when a lot of the men who would have been, fathers at the time don't exist anymore? You have a lot of women who can't reproduce. You had a lot of people with skills who could solve problems and build. They're dead and gone now. You have lost a huge resource out of your population. And some of those people in that generation don't ever recover from that. And then you have places like France, and this picture up here shows you that they were trying to do a new government and get stuff back together, because France got whooped hard. France has had political groups like we do, but we really just have two. So you have Democrats and Republicans, and you kind of have to join one side or the other. But in France, you see they had multiple groups. And if you've ever been in a group, it's hard to get more people on the same page when you have more options. So France was kind of unstable a little bit. And France was so adamant that Germany stayed where they were. So one of the French fears was scandals. Write that down.
Oh, yeah.
France had scandals that made their government weak, so they were afraid of who's really in charge, because they're fighting themselves now. You had some money missing, you had some, people doing things they weren't supposed to, they had lost all their buildings in some cities, railroads. France was afraid of who was in charge. And what they wanted was to rebuild, go back to normal. And it wasn't going to work that way. So put on French wants, they wanted to go back to normal and rebuild. But it's not going to work so good. Mainly because France was so angry at Germany, and they're going to go out of their way to punish Germany. Germany had invaded France multiple times, and it's going to happen again after this, so France has, kind of a legit concern here. France is afraid of Germany invading, so put that down as a fear. France is afraid Germany will invade, because they had multiple times, and it was going to happen again in World War II.
How do you spell afraid? Is it one F or two F's?
One. F grade.
Where am I supposed to write this at?
Under fears for France. France is afraid Germany would invade, and there's a border between them. France and Germany actually touch each other. So this red line is called the Maginot Line, and they wanted an actual fort build to keep Germany in Germany, and Germany couldn't come back in anymore. France was adamant they were going to punish Germany, so they wanted to punish Germany. That's a want. Write that down. France wanted to punish Germany, or you could put revenge. They wanted revenge. They wanted to make Germany pay a crazy amount of money for the war. So much money, there was no way Germany was ever going to pay that off. And once you're in debt so far, there's no way out. You're just going to have to let it go. There's just no way. $55 billion back then it's a crazy amount now. It was insane back then. So they wanted to punish Germany and make them weak and put them in debt for the rest of their lives so they couldn't get out. Keep them weak. France also wanted to be buddies with Russia, because Russia's on the other side of Germany, and if the two of them could keep Germany in their place, then Germany wouldn't be bold anymore. So put down France wanted to be friends with Russia to gang up on Germany. France wanted to be friends with Russia to gang up on Germany. Because if you have two of them on each side of Germany, Germany's sort of kept in their place. Spoiler alert, that doesn't work.
Was there any once on the U.S.?
Germany feared, U.S. feared communism, Russia, immigrants.
No,
Once.
Once?
Yeah, you
Oh,
have.
once they wanted a white Christian group as the dominant group. And you could put Protestant. They didn't want Catholics. They wanted Protestant white groups. Now, Britain has some problems too. First of all, Britain had this backlash because you had a rich monarchy in control. And you had a lot of people who were poor who were working and supporting the war effort, and they wanted better working conditions, better pay, and more say in the government. So Britain wanted workers' influence. Write that down. Britain wanted workers' influence in the government. The Labour Party, which still exists to this day, pushes for workers' rights, better pay, say in the government, benefits, good working conditions. They don't want the wealthy business owners to control everything.
They wanted what?
Workers' rights. And they wanted no more war, because the poor people who were the ones who were drafted into war as soldiers, and they're the ones who usually got killed or mangled. So they wanted more say in how Britain acted in war. They also had strikes, and Britain was fearful of worker strikes. So that's a British fear, worker strikes. Because if the workers stop working, you can't produce stuff and make money. And Britain needed money to rebuild all this stuff. And so there are posters all around that say labor. They spell labor with a U, because Britain usually adds an extra vowel, but there's still signs around for the Labour Party. But Britain had an agenda. Britain wanted their empire protected. So that's a 1. Britain owned a ton of land all over the world. They wanted to keep it, and they wanted the profits. Because Britain's all about Britain money. Yes?
How much land do you have? How much
They have
land
at
do you-
least, I don't know, 40 or 50 places that became independent.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they owned everything. They owned something on every continent except Antarctica.
Yeah.
And so they wanted to keep that. They also wanted to limit the German Navy. Because if you limited the German Navy, that meant the British Navy was dominant and they would make more money. So Britain wanted to limit the German Navy, keep Germany a little less powerful. That also didn't work out. Now, they wanted Germany to be weak, but if you totally annihilate a country, the people are going to get mad and revolt, and there's going to be some drastic decision in the future. And that's exactly what happened. Germany became weak, but then the people got angry, and you have Hitler that comes along and kind of riles them up, and you have round 2. So Britain wanted Germany to be weak, but not so weak that they would get whooped by France and Russia. So Britain feared France and Russia friendship. Because if France and Russia were hooked up together, they might be more powerful than Britain, and Britain couldn't stand it. So Britain was afraid of a French and Russian friendship. Britain tries real hard to just continue to be dominant at this point. And ironically, Britain is never as powerful as it was before this. Now, there's also a big problem in Britain. Britain has taken control of the island of Ireland for about 1,000 years. They just rolled in and took over control. The Irish people have been angry about it since, and they've wanted independence. So on Ireland, put independence. They want independence. Because Britain is mostly Protestant, and Ireland is mostly Catholic, they're all Christians. They just argue over some of the details. But the Protestants are like the opposite of Catholics, but still Christian. So they don't get along. Britain promised them that they would be independent at the beginning of the war. But oops, they forgot to actually go ahead and do that promise. So they made a promise that they didn't keep, and Ireland was mad about it. Then World War I started, and Britain was obviously occupied and couldn't deal with, the Irish stuff. And some of the Irish got recruited into the war. In the middle of the war, 1916, on Easter, which is a huge holiday for Catholics and Christians, they have a revolt. It's called the Easter Rising. You have a revolt that killed some British people and created awareness that Ireland wanted to be independent, and they were tired of waiting, and they wanted Britain to get on it. So Britain, after the war, made a promise again. Yes, we're going to let you have home rule. Yes, we'll let you be independent. But they're going to fail again to keep the promise. Because Britain doesn't really want to let go. British never want to let go. So then you have a group that gets together in Ireland called the Irish Republican Army. And what they do is guerrilla tactics. That means surprise attack and surprise war going on in all kinds of places. It's basically terrorism. You don't know when it's coming, but you know there's some attack somewhere. There's no like organization, it's just people jumping out, shooting and pipe bombs and all kinds of stuff. This has gone on up until, actually this still goes on every once in a while. Someone gets bent out of shape, but this surprise tactics is very effective because you don't know when you're going to get attacked. It's not like we meet at noon and we fight in the field. It's surprise attacks. Most Ireland is Catholic, but the very northern part up here in the map here, you have a lot of Irish who are also Protestant. So they're Irish and they kind of want Ireland to be free, but they kind of relate to Britain because they're Protestant, so they're kind of torn in the middle. And they didn't really want to divorce Britain, but the rest of Ireland does. So some of the Irish turned on their other Irish people because they kind of saw them as traitors, and they've still gone pretty brutal here and there since. And you have this fighting that goes on all over the place. Now, this video is narrated by Liam Neeson, who is an Irish actor. He's also the little guy in the Lego movie, Good Cop, Bad Cop. And you had kids, you had women, you had all kinds of people just involved throwing Molotov cocktails and shooting people, and it kind of was just scattered all over the place.
Easter Monday, April 1916. A small band of rebels, including poets and teachers, actors and workers, gathers in Dublin, intent on establishing an independent Irish Republic and bringing about an end to 700 years of British rule. The plan is to take control of key locations throughout the city before the British have time to act. Britain is engaged in war in Europe, where its army of millions, including 200,000 Irishmen, are suffering casualties on an unprecedented scale. Britain's distraction presents the rebels with an opportunity and a glimmer of hope.
You can almost feel in 1916 the clock of civilization is beginning to turn, and the old British Empire is beginning to come apart at the seams.
The Irish see what's going on in Ireland as being part and parcel of things that are happening through this world. The new world is coming into being, and America was a part of that. And so when the emigres head over to America, they're not going to evolve. They're going to an end they want Ireland to ultimately be.
What they brought with them was this hunger for freedom. They saw it here in the United States.
They are looking at Ireland from the American perspective, and they've imbibed something of this can-do mentality. It's already part of the American psyche. This is the secret, in many ways, of 1916.
As the men and women of 1916 take on the mind of the British Empire, their leaders are aware that they have little hope of success. And yet, the time has come. The most momentous week in Irish history is about to begin.
There is an element of deep historical self-consciousness where they stand in the centuries of Irish history and the historic moment that they are creating.
A republic has been proclaimed, and there was simply no way that the British government could tolerate a republic on its doorstep.
Britain pours.
Okay, so Ireland, even though they're mostly Catholic and the U.S. wants no immigrants over here, when they do start kind of coming in, the fact that Ireland wants to kick out Britain and be independent is something the U.S. can definitely relate to because we've done it. So we kind of drop the anti-Catholic hatred and we start helping Ireland a little bit because if anybody wants to kick Britain, it's the U.S. So here are some of the paintings and stuff that are around Ireland still. There's still this sentiment that they're worried Britain is going to kind of come back over. And it was in the last 5 or 10 years that Ireland is independent, but they still have a heavy British influence.
When did they paint that?
When did they paint it? I'm not sure about these other ones, but there are stuff all over Ireland. About the Easter Rising, there are books, there's movies about 1916. They have all these flags. That is, the Irish language is called Gaelic, and so it's kind of a older version of English, but they have like extra letters in places. You got all kinds of stuff here. And I made it sound all bad. Some of it was good. We just weren't good at holding our promises. So 3 things that we tried to do that were good, that all didn't do so well, was one, in 1925, we let the neighbors of Germany decide where the borders were, because we wanted Germany to stay in Germany, because Germany had taken over most of the continent. We let the neighbors like France and Belgium, Czechoslovakia, and Poland decide where Germany stopped and where they started. It was a nice effort, but Germany's going to take over the continent again the second time around, because Germany didn't stay in Germany. The second one, a couple years later, is you had you had a whole bunch of nations that promised not to do war anymore. Good goal, but that never ever happened. There was no one to tell them, no, you can't do war. And obviously it's going to explode into World War II. So this was a good goal, but that didn't happen.
Why did they say that?
Well, because World War I was the worst war anybody had ever seen. And we had weapons that were way more powerful than anything we'd ever created before. But nobody got anything out of World War I. We just stopped. This is going too horrible. So everybody's resentful, and then you come along Hitler and other people that get people riled up, and we have World War II. And it was even worse than the first one. So we have not had World War III, but we have come dangerously close, like one push of a button away from World War III, which we'll get to in a couple weeks. The last one was we reduced some of our weapons, because the more weapons you have, the itchier your trigger finger gets. And so we said we're going to have less weapons. But we also said we're going to not have our navies be as big, but we let the armies get bigger and bigger and bigger, which ended up going into World War II. So we had all these good intentions, but that didn't work out. One of the other things that didn't work out was we made this group called the League of Nations that was in Switzerland, the country, that said we're going to try to work out our conflicts instead of going to war all the time. That never worked out. Mostly because the U.S. would never join, because we weren't about to be told what we could and couldn't do. And because this group had no backing of enforcement, we couldn't stop Japan from going into China. We couldn't stop China from killing all their people. We didn't stop Hitler until later on. So this group had a nice goal, but it didn't have any backbone. And if you're a dictator who has a lot of power and a lot of weapons built up, and you know there's no one to stop you, you can just go ahead and continue being a dictator, because there's no one to stop you. Now, your assignment today, why I was playing this song, is the Cranberries are an Irish band that were big in the 90s, and they wrote a song about 1916. And so you're going to make a private comment as your answer today about what is this 1916 reference to.
Why do you have it to where we can only open so many tabs?
Because some people do it so much to credit perhaps their computers so they don't have to do work. Well, so in the video, there are kids fighting. And you're going to tell me why are they fighting? Because it looks like play, but what are they recreating? And what did Ireland want? Because you have this on your chart. And then you'll turn your chart in.